family mode.
Welcome. Thanks for joining us for September's webcast of the ILA's Leadership Perspective Series. This is Catherine Gaines. I'm a member of the Board of Directors of the International Leadership Association, and I'm moderating this webinar with Ellen Van Velsor, Senior Fellow of the Center for Creative Leadership. Before we start, I wanted to just take care of a couple of housekeeping issues. First, the webinar is going to be recorded and archived, so if you missed something and want to hear the webinar again or want to see the slide presentation again, they're going to be published on the ILA website shortly, and everyone who's participating will receive an email with instructions for how to access that archived recording. Secondly, we welcome your questions throughout the webinar. At any time, you may ask questions by typing them into the questions box. If you look at your webinar control panel on the right-hand side, you'll see the box where you can address your questions or type your questions, and they'll be addressed during the latter portion of the webinar. We're going to make sure that we save at least the last 15 minutes or so for Ellen to address some of your questions. And please know that we might not be able to address every question we receive. And with that, I would like to introduce Ellen Van Velsor, who, in addition to being a senior fellow with the Center for Creative Leadership, is also an adjunct professor of the Leadership Studies at North Carolina A&T State University, as well as serving as a board member for the International Leadership Association. And she is a co-editor of the Center for Creative Leadership's Handbook of Leadership Development, as well as the author of numerous book chapters, articles, and reports on leadership and leadership development. Her current work focuses on youth leadership development, identity development in adults, and globally responsible leadership. Welcome, Ellen.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm really glad to be here, and I'd like to also welcome everyone to Developing Next Generation Leaders, Challenges and Promise. And I thank you for your interest in this topic. I would like to first set just a little context and talk about the questions that we have been concerned with in this area. So to start with, if you think about it, the next generation of leaders are really entering the workforce today, either out of college or they have entered the workforce in the past 5 or so years. So really, when I say next generation throughout this talk, I'm going to be talking about two groups of people sort of alternately. One is, high school and college students, who will be leaders in the future in their organizations. And then also, I'm going to be talking about the younger people who are in the workforce today, people who are in mostly individual contributor roles, but they're the potential leaders of the future. So people who are not yet in managerial roles because, of course, the way that leadership development is now, usually people have to wait until they're in some sort of supervisory role to get any leadership development. So when I say next generation leaders, I'm talking about those two groups. If you think about it, the challenges that these young people are going to face as leaders going forward are immense, mostly given the uncertainty in the economy, both nationally and globally, the political environment, and then the uncertainty around the physical environment going forward. They're going to be facing some new and very complex challenges. So one of the things we've been interested in is finding out more about what current leaders think in terms of whether young people have what is needed in the entry-level workforce today. So that's focusing on that population of young people who are already in the workforce. Do they have what is needed today in the eyes of the current leaders? And then the second important question is, to what extent are they being developed as leaders? How much energy is going into that? What needs to be done in that area? Because the context really points to leadership as more important than ever, not just for people in positions of authority, but really for maximum effectiveness regardless of one's role in an organization. And then finally, how should leadership development happen? And when should it happen, given the current context and, how we see the younger generation in the workforce today and in college? So basically, I have been focused with my colleagues here on 3 different sources of data that I want to talk about today. The first is a 2012 online survey that CCL did of business, government, nonprofit, and education leaders. This was through our Leadership Insights panel, which is primarily a group of alumni of our programs from various sectors. So these are current leaders. We did have 462 responses to a survey we put out about youth in the workforce today. And then the other source of data that I'll draw on to a somewhat lesser extent is the results of a youth leadership summit that with some partner organizations we held here in Greensboro, Center for Creative Leadership, in 2011. And there we pulled together 24 youth leadership development practitioners from 16 different major national or international youth leadership development organizations. These were, mostly nonprofit organizations that focus mainly on youth leadership development. And then the third group that I want to get some information from is you all as participants. So I've got a question or two for you along the way on this topic. The online survey, we focused on several questions. And this was just a couple of months ago now, several months ago. We first asked these leaders to tell us from a list that we gave them, a quite extensive list of competencies. We asked them to choose the top competencies that they felt were important now in the entry-level workforce. So today, focusing on today, what did they think was most important in the people coming into the workforce today? Then we asked them also to reflect from the same list and tell us what competencies, thinking back 20 years ago, they felt were most valued then in an entry-level workforce. And then thirdly, we asked them to think forward 10 years from now and choose from that same list which competencies they thought would be most important in the future for this same, not the same people, but the population entering the workforce 10 years from now. So we could really get a picture of, in the perception of these leaders, what kinds of change has happened and may happen going forward. Then we asked them 2 open-ended questions. We asked them what excites leaders most, what excites them most about the young people that they work with today in their organizations, and then what concerns them most about these same young people. And then finally, we asked them when and how should leadership development start, recognizing that leader development typically starts when people start a managerial role. And we actually have the experience at Center for Creative Leadership of hearing from the managers who come through our programs that they really wish they had had something like that, at a much younger age, much younger age. So we wanted to ask these panelists when and how leadership development should start in their view, and to whom it should be offered, how broadly, in other words. Then in the Youth Leadership Summit, I mentioned as the second source of data, that was a conference where we pulled these folks together, and they spent, 2.5 days just really working together to identify what they saw as some of the key challenges facing youth leadership development practitioners, those folks who are really focused on doing this work. And then what they saw as the most important outcomes that their organizations achieve in terms of youth leadership development. And then what's next? What's needed for the future in this field and to really have the kind of impact that they would like to have. So I'll be telling you a little bit about that. But first, I'd like to go to what I mentioned as the third source of data, which is the views that you all have. What capabilities do you feel are most important for young people entering the workforce today? What I would like you to do is think about that for a minute and just type into your chat box 1 or 2 capabilities and choose the directed to staff option for your chat entry. Directed to staff. So type in 1 or 2 capabilities that come to mind as most important in your view for young people entering the workforce today. I'll give you a minute to do that. So I'm seeing self-awareness, ability to learn, excuse me, ability to work in a team, flexibility or adaptability, working independently, kind of self-directed, self-motivated, writing skills, some other kinds of communication skills, recognizing that they're leaders already, so having that leader identity, resilience and versatility, more about communication, being service-oriented, having some experience turning something around or creating change, a lot about self-starting, I'm seeing, problem solvers, decision-making skills, the ability to operate with a clear sense of purpose, mission, values, that inner clarity, again, relating to self-awareness, being able to navigate across boundaries, work in a team, self-confidence, relationship skills. Good, okay. Well, thank you. That's really interesting. Seeing more about character. Okay, I'm going to close this window now and show you a little bit about what we found in our online survey, which I think, a little bit of surprises there and quite a bit that you all have mentioned as well. So in terms of our survey responses, now this was remember, over 400 leaders from a variety of sectors, corporate, education, nonprofit. The 2 capabilities most needed today were self-motivation or discipline. We saw a lot of responses in your responses under that theme. That was 44%. And then communicating effectively. Those were by far the top responses, followed by learning agility, self-awareness, adaptability and versatility. A lot of the comments around learning agility had to do with being able to take on new new skills, being a quick study, being able to take new perspectives, getting out of their comfort zone. And then adaptability and versatility tended to have more of a flavor of being open-minded, tolerant, multi-skilled, not rigid, being willing to move, having some experience, having to, face and deal with change effectively. And the ones with the asterisks are ones where corporate leaders were significantly more likely than people in the ed sector or the nonprofit sector to cite those as important. Although everyone did cite those as important, there were a few significant differences by sector. So then, remember, the next thing we had asked them about was to reflect back 20 years ago and name from that same list the capabilities that they thought most important 20 years ago. So what I have on this next slide is the comparison of 20 years ago and today. So today you can see the self-motivation and discipline are at the top, whereas 20 years ago 53% of people thought that technical mastery was the most important capability for people coming into the workforce. And of course that doesn't appear on the top 5 list for today at all. Self-motivation and discipline and communicate effectively are both still there 20 years ago. At self-motivation at approximately the same percentage, communicate effectively a little bit lower. And then you see confidence appearing 20 years ago and resourcefulness. So, some significant differences there between the way people reflect back on what was important 20 years ago versus today. And then we also asked people to think 10 years rather from now about what might be important. And I think this is so interesting in a variety of ways. First of all, you still see self-motivation, discipline, and communicate effectively on the top 5 list. So I'm going to return to that a little bit later in this talk because you'll see that those issues come up over and over again. And you also see learning agility having some presence 10 years from now in people's thinking. People feel like that will still be important, as will adaptability. And adaptability going right to the top of the list here 10 years from now. The other thing I notice when I look at this is that the percentages overall are somewhat lower 10 years from now. And, they seem kind of more dispersed in people's thinking about the future. I think people are maybe less sure about what the future holds than they are clear about what they're looking for today. So that may be some of that. And then you also get multicultural awareness coming into play and collaboration as more important 10 years from now than perhaps they are now. And self-awareness kind of not disappearing, it just moves lower on the list below the top 5. And we have 6 on the 10 years from now list because there was a tie there between self-motivation and collaboration at 20%. The other interesting piece here is that there's a significant difference. The double asterisk represents a significant difference between those in the 35 to 49 age group and those 50 and older, with more of the younger group, the 35 to 49 age group, choosing that as a top characteristic, so choosing adaptability as a top characteristic than the older folks. And then the plus sign is a significant difference across managerial levels, with middle managers more likely to choose adaptability than either supervisors or senior managers as something important going forward. So then we had the 2 open-ended questions. So here we gave people no direction. We just asked, what excites you most about the younger generation who are at work in your organizations today? I'll give you a quick chance to look at that. And so what I have listed here is the top 8 responses based on a thematic analysis of all of the qualitative responses that we got from folks. And so these are the top 8, and they are in order of mention. So comfort and skill with technology of this younger group was the thing that most people was the most frequent mention in terms of what excites them. And creativity, openness, fresh ideas, that was almost at the same percentage frequency of mention as comfort and skill with technology. So generally you can see that this younger generation is seen by current leaders as, you know, very creative, very open, tolerant, adaptable, ready to learn, comfortable with the pace of change, very confident and willing to challenge the status quo, enthusiastic, collaborative, team-oriented, and really wanting to make a difference. So when you look at that, I mean, that's, you know, there's just a huge, huge recognition of potential there. And, you know, that was what was exciting about the What Excites You Most list. I think also to relate what people are saying here to the slide about what was needed today. If you think back to the competencies that were needed today, one of them was learning agility. And so you can see that there's a great degree of learning agility that people recognize and are excited about in the young people in the workforce today. I think people are feeling like that's needed and it's there. And then also adaptability. That was mentioned as one of the most important factors today, and people are very excited that they see that in their younger workforce. Then you remember we asked them also to tell us in an open-ended fashion what concerns them most about these young people. And by far, the most frequent comment was along the lines of being concerned with what people called the younger generation's unjustified and unrealistic sense of entitlement. And so this, you know, has to do with, you know, several people in their comments on this topic talked about this as the trophy generation, you know, being a younger generation that, you know, has always, you know, gotten what they wanted, and so now they move into the workforce and they still expect to, you know, move ahead and be a leader and, you know, get raises and promotions way before people think they are ready. So that was a major concern, and, you know, seemed like a significant tension in the environments that these leaders worked. And I think, you know, as I reflect on it, you know, I can understand, you know, where some of that's coming from, because if you have a group of young people that are ready to go and creative and full of ideas and, you know, wanting to make a difference, well, you know, they are going to want to make a difference, and they're going to want to take on responsibility, and to the extent that they feel the system holds them back, I'm sure that's creating some frustration. So going a little bit deeper into this list, and again, this list is in order of frequency. So the next thing that, you know, the majority of people were concerned about was a perceived lack of ability on the part of the younger generation to communicate effectively face-to-face. And you know, in the views that you all put forward, you put forward a lot of folks mentioned communication as something that's very important in the workforce today. And of course, we also saw that in our online survey. Communication was one of the most frequently chosen capabilities that were needed not only today, but 20 years ago and 10 years from now. And yet, what people are seeing is that, you know, this next generation of leaders is very technology savvy when it comes to communication, but a lot of people in this survey framed this concern around lack of ability to communicate effectively as an overdependence on communicating through technology and not really being very good at communicating face-to-face in particular. And then, we heard a lack of drive, not self-motivating, as a concern, which kind of goes with this unrealistic sense of entitlement, but conflicts to some degree, with the previous statement around what excites them about young people being enthusiastic and having a great work ethic. So the only clue that I saw in these data around that presumed contradiction, I don't think it's really a contradiction. Several people said, we really do see kind of two groups of people in the next generation of leaders in our workforce. We see those that are very highly committed and energetic and creative and ready to go, and then we see another group who really do lack drive and are not self-motivated. And I also wondered whether, if you've got this group of young people who are very creative and ready to take on the world, if they don't feel like they're getting the opportunities they need, are they going to become, of course, less driven, not as self-motivated over time? So I think that may be a real danger, especially because of the next concern that these folks voiced, which was a lack of learning opportunities that they see young people getting that are adequate to the future challenges that they face. This was probably the concern that was not only very frequent, but more focused on the system in which the youth are working than on the youth themselves. And so there was a good deal of recognition that young people who are not yet in managerial roles are not getting the mentoring that they need. And a lot of people talked about how young people don't have enough positive role models today. They don't have the mentoring they need at work, but also when you look out into the world, or when young people are looking out into the world, they have a lot of negative role models, but not a lot of positive role models. And then their third concern was around training, namely the leadership development training that the majority of youth are not getting, either before they come into the workforce, or once they're in the workforce, they're having to wait until they're seen as a leader in order to get some leadership development training, and or mentoring along those lines. So that was a real concern. And then people talked about some specific concerns around decision-making skills, having a long-term perspective, which of course most people realized comes with time. Several people said that they had the sense that young people lack a strong sense of values, and connected that sometimes to their lack of positive role models or mentoring. Lack of self-awareness, which also of course comes with time and maturity. And then this idea of being overconfident and not open to input, which was related in some people's mind to this unrealistic sense of entitlement. So let's see. I'm interested in your reactions to this. I think this is pretty rich data, and we have spent some time thinking about it and reflecting on the meaning of it. But again, I would like for you, if you could, to go over to the chat area, and if you have any thoughts about this, and by this I mean either the concerns or the relationship between the concerns and the excitement, some of these issues around ability to communicate as a development need versus technology as a strength. Any comments around this issue of being self-motivating or not, or lacking learning opportunities? Any ideas about or reactions to what might be done about that, please type them into your chat box at this time and direct them again to staff. Excuse me.
Ellen, this is Catherine. I have a few questions as well that have been posed around the overall survey itself, the respondents. Do you want to hold those for the end?
Yeah, let's hold those to the end.
Okay.
So I'm seeing some agreement with the unrealistic sense of entitlement as a concern. Interesting comment around the notion that decision-making skills will come with time. Some disagreement with that. As a young person in the workplace, person writes, I definitely struggle with some of these concerns. Some disagreement with the lack of self-awareness. Drive and motivation require someone whom they can believe in. Do they have that? Some evidence, I guess, that people feel like they don't. The sense of entitlement and lacking values might be cultural. When young people hear negative input, they can walk away from actively leading and appear to be lacking motivation. Someone writes, I see this generation as respecting multicultural but not respecting previous generation ideas. They're inclusive within their own generation. Yeah, you know, we did have several comments in our survey to that effect as well. And I think if we had surveyed younger people, they might have said the same thing about the older generation. So I think that's a tension that does exist. Agreement that we need to provide more learning opportunities. Why are corporations so reluctant to provide those? I do have some ideas about that. Some belief that lack of opportunities is associated with lack of drive, certainly. Or maybe lack of drive on the individual's part is associated with, is causing lack of opportunities. So some questions about which direction, you know, what causes what there. More agreement about young people not being willing to put in the time before being promoted. A question about whether the proliferation of college student leadership development has had an effect on the lack of learning opportunities. Validation from the university environment about some of these areas of excitement and concern. A sense that maybe as a boomer we didn't ask for enough when we were younger. And young people are just asking for what's not necessarily due to them, but you know, what they need. And we as a boomer population didn't do that. Well, thank you. I really appreciate all of your comments, and I don't know if this this occurred to you as you were putting them in, but For me as a researcher, this is kind of another source of data. All of you, I presume, are, signed on to this webinar because you're interested in this topic and have some investment in it. So, in my own thinking, I appreciate your input, and, we'll kind of start to blend this in with some of the other survey data that we've gotten to see, what else we can learn from it. So I really do appreciate that. Let me move on at this point. And I want to spring from this idea that several of you seem to agree with, that there is a lack of learning opportunities that are being presented to young people in the workforce, regardless of whether or the extent to which they had any leadership development in high school or college. Once they get in the workforce, there's a pretty uniform concern that they're not getting what they need from their organizations at those early ages. So just moving forward from that, if there is that concern, when should leadership development start? And so we ask our survey respondents that question. And interestingly enough, we were a little surprised at this. Most people thought that 90% actually of people thought that leadership development should start before young people graduate from high school. So we've got 40%, which represents kind of late middle school and high school age, almost 30% in the elementary school years, and 21% less than 5 years old, 21% preschool. So if you add the college years, you've got fully 97% of people think that, 97% of current leaders think that leadership development should start before college graduation, and most of them before high school graduation. So, that in the context of most leadership development starting when you're a manager, and only 4% say it should start over 21 years old. So, and then we also ask who should benefit. Should this be something just given to youth who express an interest, or high potential youth, or who? And 84% say leadership development should be offered to all people, all young people, and 90% say that that should be a part of a student's educational experience. And there was broad agreement about that across sectors. So nonprofit leaders, education leaders, corporate leaders, all thought that leadership development should be part of a student's educational experience. So this sort of links for us to what we learned from that Youth Leadership Summit. Remember, we pulled together leadership development practitioners for this summit to get their views on a variety of issues. So from this meeting, these were all youth leadership development practitioners from the nonprofit sector. And the main themes that came out of that conference is that leadership development definitely has a transformational effect on youth when youth have the opportunity to do that. And these were mostly folks working with high school and college students, although some of them worked with younger ages as well. And the way in which it has that transformational effect is really through being a catalyst for the development of an initial leader identity, coming to see oneself as a person to whom the label leader could be applied. That's a huge impact on youth. They also talked a lot about the anxiety that they experience, but also they see in trying to get some actual leadership opportunities for youth. And I think we may be seeing this in some of the concerns that we got on our online survey. The anxiety on the part of older people when confident youth want to lead. So when you do expose youth to leadership development and they begin to see themselves as a leader, what needs to happen is that they need to have an opportunity to actually enact that leadership. And that's not only possibly a source of frustration for the young people in the workforce today, but also, our point of view is that when you're doing leadership development with youth, they also have to have an opportunity to actually enact that. They also have to have a place to enact leadership. And you can't really do that in the context of a program in a very authentic way. It has to be, blended into the program, or in their lives, in other parts of their lives, they need to have some opportunities to actually exercise leadership. So just switching to another area in terms more of a research focus, one of the interesting things that came out of the Youth Leadership Summit was that we don't really know as much as we need to know about what is age-appropriate leadership development for youth. So if you are going to start with the preschool age, as our online survey respondents suggest, some of them, what would be the needs and capabilities at that level, or in elementary school, or in middle school, or in high school, or in college? What would a whole curriculum look like that was age-appropriate for leadership development? That's kind of a cutting-edge topic right now in the field among practitioners. There was also a great deal of recognition, even though our online survey tells us that, this leadership development should be part of the educational curriculum. There was also a recognition that the educational system is struggling to begin with, in the United States anyway, and how to actually include and incorporate leader development when schools are so test focused is a real challenge, and there needs to be more partnership between leadership development practitioners, business organizations, and the education sector to figure out how to make that happen. And then, of course, third, funding. That was a big issue for these youth leadership practitioners, particularly in a weak economy, and trying to come up with, in partnership with business, perhaps some new funding models, because funding in this economy is definitely becoming more and more of a problem for some of these nonprofits who are focused in this area. So just quickly, where do we go from here? I think the current model of providing development opportunities mostly for managers is clearly something we all agree is inadequate. I think we all agree, at least from the sources of data that we've looked at, that the basics are really there in the next generation of leaders. We saw all sorts of excitement around creativity, learning orientation, confidence, team orientation, but their development opportunities are lacking once they get in the workforce in particular, but even more broadly for youth in high school and college. There are only a segment of those younger populations do get involved in leadership development. So access needs to be broadened. And the things that are lacking are specific skills that could be and are implemented in most leadership development initiatives. Leader development in a context of leadership opportunity, we can't just send people through programs. We need to then actually give them opportunities to really practice leadership in a mentored context. And I think, organizations in the workforce are particularly well positioned to do that. And then focusing on some specifics, especially in high school and college, around communication. Communication is a skill, face-to-face skill that can be taught, and evidently is not being enough of a focus in the education sector today. And then what work needs to be done within organizational systems? One thing that occurs to me is kind of this change of mindset around leadership development. Who gets it, how it's done. We don't always have to send people to expensive programs. Existing leaders can do a better job of, mentoring young people around some of these capabilities. Organizational systems can be set up around that. And also cross-generational mentoring. Clearly, from what excites leaders, youth have a lot to offer, and they have a lot to offer the older generation. And so some cross-generational mentoring programs, I think, would be of great benefit to everybody in an organization today. So I will leave it at that. I do want to say, before we start questions, We will have a white paper coming out on the CCL website. It's not quite out yet, that covers this study and in more detail. And if you would like a copy of that, if you either can pay attention to the CCL website and see when it comes out, or you can email me at this address. Just send me a quick email and I will send you the paper as soon as it's available. And then the Youth Leadership Summit white paper is already on our website, and there's the link. You can click on that and download that immediately. So I will take any questions at this point.
All right, Ellen, we have a large volume of questions, so I will do my best to prioritize, knowing we will not get to all of them. There were a few related to the survey itself and the respondents right at the beginning, so maybe you could touch on those quickly. One question had to do with the cultural profile of the survey respondents, whether it was predominantly U.S.
Yes, it was predominantly U.S. We were a little disappointed to see that because we were real interested in, you know, other points of view, but it was like 98% U.S., so we did not look at any differences because the percentage of people elsewhere was very, very small.
And another question, what did the older group of respondents think was the top priority? I'm guessing, wondering if there were any differences.
No, the only differences, the only age difference that we saw was the one I showed. It was just that one difference. Generally, we did not see significant differences either by sector or by age, except for those couple that I highlighted in the talk.
And there were several different questions seeking clarification or definition. For example, learning agility, as well as for those who joined us late, clarifying, you know, what you define as youth or young leadership next generation.
Okay, so leadership agility, I'm going back to that slide.
Or learning agility.
Oh, learning agility, okay. Yeah, learning agility, when people talked about that, they were really talking about the willingness of people to move outside of their comfort zone, to have a learning orientation, to show curiosity, to want to learn new things and be able to actually learn new things, to take on new perspectives, to kind of be a quick study, which of course you'd want someone to be who's coming fresh into an organization. You'd want them to kind of pick things up quickly. So that's what they tended to be talking about. And then what was the second part of the question?
It was for those who joined late. What is, I'm trying to find the actual question, what do you count? What constitutes next generation?
Oh, okay. So in the survey, what we were asking people about was the next generation of leaders in the workforce today. So that was really people who were, you know, not in any kind of a supervisory or managerial role yet, but were, you know, 5 to 10 years out of college and, you know, their newest crop of people in their organizations. Who were, you know, mostly in individual contributor roles at this point, or maybe very early supervisory roles, who they would see as the next generation of leaders. So that's what the online survey was focused on. Really then we had asked those same folks about what they thought, how they thought leadership development should be offered to young people before they got into the workforce. And then I sort of transitioned into the Youth Leadership Summit, where those practitioners are focused on next generation as current high school and college students. So I was primarily focused on next generation in the workforce today, but also a bit towards the end of the talk more on what can we do with high school, college, and even middle school, because our survey respondents said that's where it should start.
And there were a few questions around distinction between leadership development and developing leaders. For example, one question. For some of us, leadership is a collective phenomenon, not the opportunity of an individual. Please explain your assumed link between leadership and developing leaders. Another was, you seem to be defining leadership as a personal characteristic rather than a process. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, I think of leader development and leadership development differently. And so if I have used those words interchangeably here, I didn't do that to confuse people. I think of leader development as focused on developing the individual leader. And leadership development as more of a collective, as this questioner, or one of these questioners described. But I also think of leadership development as sort of a broader category that includes both collective, development of leadership as a process and the individual leader development as a piece of that. So in order for all of us to lead collectively, we each need to be able to lead individually. It would be one way to say it. I think what people in this survey were focused on, and what most youth leadership development practitioners also focus on, is individual leader development, especially at the middle and high school and college age, because individuals are still forming a leader identity, even learning to see themselves as leaders, especially when you think beyond those youth who are in positions of leadership, president of their senior class or whatever. They may have already started down the road of developing a leader identity. But if you think about, putting leadership development opportunities or leader development opportunities out to a much broader group of youth, including everyone, making it part of the school curriculum, you would be doing more individual leader development, helping youth develop an ability to see themselves as leaders so that they could begin to take on some of those responsibilities in productive ways, and develop that kind of self-awareness. So that's individual leader development. That's where most youth leader development starts. And of course, a lot of programs for youth focus on, how to be an effective member of a team. But I do distinguish that from leadership as a process, yes.
All right, we have many questions, about 5 or 6 minutes left. I'm going to give you 3 related questions on the same topic around learning opportunities.
Okay.
First, in my work environment experience, there's never been a lack of learning opportunities. I have observed those that have no interest in growing academically or professionally, leaders that target certain individuals for specific training opportunities, those with a lack of motivation that attend training more often than those with motivation, drive, and dedication. I'm very curious, would like to hear more about leaders' views of training opportunities for the young. That was the first one. The second, are development opportunities lacking, or is the demand among young people not there for getting involved in development activities? Is it about creating more opportunities or re-educating young people about the benefits of leadership development? And there was a third one. Interesting to explore, how can young people take advantage of opportunities for training, practicing leadership skills in organizations outside of work, such as volunteer organizations? How can these organizations play a role in helping prepare young leaders for leadership roles in work environment?
Okay.
So, I know that was a lot all at once. The questions were centering around, is it really a lack of opportunity, and what are, exploring some other possibilities?
Yeah. So, so that middle question, is it about creating more opportunities, or is it about educating youth about the value of taking advantage of opportunities? And I really don't see that as an either or. I would say it's both of those things, because I think that, there are, if you think about youth in high school, there are opportunities for youth to get involved in leader development through the YMCA, through Girl Scouts, through Boy Scouts, through Kiwanis. There's lots of opportunities. So the question then is, what do we do to help youth see what the value of those opportunities are? And, that's an important question that, in the Youth Leadership Summit, of course that came up. But I think the way in which it came up at the Youth Leadership Summit was to say, we each do our own, each of us who get involved in youth leadership development do our own sort of studies of impact and put those out there. But we don't know enough about the overall impact of youth leader development. I mean, we know it in our hearts as practitioners, but we don't have enough of a well-organized message about that can go out to the world to help youth, and also the parents who presumably help the youth get involved and mentor the youth to direct them to some of these opportunities. We youth leadership development practitioners don't have enough of a strong message about that. And of course, the other thing that came up was each organization that is focused on youth leadership development sort of has its own program. So Girl Scouts is great, Boy Scouts is great, the YMCA is great, but they're all doing their own thing. And there's a lot of similarity among what they do, but each program has its own need to fill itself. And so how do we together, as a field, sort of put out the message that this is, not only put it out to youth and their parents, but also partner better with educators to really get this message out there to youth and their parents. So I think it's, that speaks more to educating youth and those in their environments about the value of taking part in some of these. A lot of the youth that do take part are doing it. I know from personal experience too. They're doing this to put it on their college resume. Because if you get your Girl Scout Gold Award or whatever, you're better positioned to get into the college that you want. So there's a lot of importance around that educational aspect. I don't know if I answered all versions of that question there, but
no, I understand. We have many questions still coming in, and at this point we really do need to wrap up. And I guess I would encourage everyone to follow up with you, Ellen, directly. There's your email address.
Yeah, definitely you can send questions to me. I'm glad to continue answering questions via email. Catherine, I also wondered if there was anything you wanted to say, because I know that you've got interest in this area as well. So I wanted
Yes, well, I did want to, for all of the participants who have an interest in this topic of youth leadership, the ILA has just launched a youth leadership member interest group, and we also have a very active young leaders affinity group. So I would invite everyone who wants to continue the dialogue to connect with either group, and especially in Denver at the conference. And I also want to thank you, Ellen, for taking the time to be with us. And
my pleasure.
And hopefully everyone will be able to join us next month in the Leadership Perspectives webinar series. The topic will be Leadership Matters, or that's the title, with Tom Cronin and Michael Genovese, held at noon Eastern Time on October 10th. And at this point, we need to just thank everyone for participating, and have a good day.
Thanks.